Hello, loved ones. I just want to give you a little encouragement in that you, individual, who have been through a lot of things, addictions, if you're listening to me, probably either you are have suffered addiction or a loved one of yours has. And while most people don't understand it and will not, and just won't, and that's fine. We don't have to talk with them about it. They don't have to accept the fact that it is a mental disease. In fact, a lot of people get triggered when you refer to addiction as a disease because they're like, well, this is something that you did to yourself. You brought this on yourself. You started using the drugs and therefore created your own addiction. That is very true. However, and then their thing is like cancer. Now that's something that's a disease. Well, cancer is also caused by behavioral things too. Not always. I understand, but my point is, a lot of people are kind of predisposed to become addicts, and I know this because when I was in active addiction, I would use with some people. Most of the people I used with were also addicts. But every once in a while, and I know that most people are familiar with this, they'll come across someone that they'll be a friend with or whatever, and this person can use a little bit here and there, maybe party on the weekend, and then put it down and walk away. Be like, I'm good. Yeah, that was fun. Um, those people are generally, I'm not saying they can't be addicted because they certainly could become physically dependent on a substance, and that can happen with anybody. But they're not predisposed to do it. See, that's where the mental addiction comes from. And you see it all the time. I mean, some people they may not become addicted to a substance, they may not become chemically addicted to a drug, but they're still addicted to things. In fact, because I've got a podcast, My Sober Addiction. If you haven't heard it, please look it up. I've got it on YouTube, but also it's just an audio podcast. So Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, so if you go onto your podcast platform, whatever it may be, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, all of them, you go on there and you search for, a podcast dealing with addiction. It's rather amazing to me how many pop up that are about like porn addiction or gambling addiction. See, my addiction was always to drugs, and I never. To me, porn or gambling addiction seems kind of it's like, well, that's not really chemical. There's no real substance there to become addicted to, but it's very much addictive. And I mean, I realize there are chemicals that are released in the brain when when people get addicted to these other things. But my point is addiction is a mental disease. That's what I'm getting at. These other things that are not chemical, at least not to begin with, such as the porn and the gambling, those don't require any substance to go inside your body, which can then cause physical dependence to cause addiction. So, I'm not saying that makes it definitively that addiction is a mental disease. That's just an example of what I mean. So, I have had friends when I was using, who could use with me a little bit. They'd be like, oh, yeah, we'll get some and we'll do it on a Friday night and we'll have fun, yada, 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 whatever. And then after that, they're like, yep, that was fun. That's cool. I'm good. And then they might do it again in a month or whatever. Point is, they weren't addicted. They just didn't have the mindset or they just didn't They just didn't get addicted to stuff. That's just not in their thing. So there's a lot of people who just don't understand, who get triggered when they hear that addiction is a mental disorder or disease. And I'm sorry that they do. And they get mad and they get, whatever about it. And they don't want to talk about it like it's that way. This is something you addicts did to yourself. All right, fine. You're right. You're absolutely right. Because someone who does have addictive tendencies doesn't necessarily mean they have to act on it, right? Doesn't mean because I'm sure there's lots of people with addictive tendencies that never get addicted. Or they get addicted to something that is a little bit more, I guess, socially acceptable, such as video games. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are very addicted to video games. But they don't really look at it that way. I guess because it's not a drug. It's not something that's necessarily bad for you, right? I mean, when I was new to sobriety, I did play this online. Well, it wasn't online. Well, it was, I guess, but it was a mobile game. It was on my phone. It was a war game. And while, gaming has never really been my thing, that did kind of, I guess, maybe satisfy the addictive mind for a while. I don't play it anymore. Now I kind of think if I'm addicted to something, it would probably be more to writing and or podcasting. But, at least that's not healthy addiction, right? But a lot of people don't want to talk about the fact that addiction is a mental disease. Well, I'm sorry, but it is. It is something to do with the way we're wired or the chemical makeup of our brain. I'm not sure. That much I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't know. Here's what I do know. It is a mental disease. And I'm sorry if that triggers you. But hopefully, if you will maybe just come to this realization, or at least an acceptance of it, maybe then you won't be so judgmental, if you are, of people who are addicted to things. I'm not saying we should enable them. In fact, I say absolutely do not enable an addict. No. So anyway, that's what I got. Just kind of wanted, what is it? A little public service announcement. So anyway, if you do want to listen to the audio podcast, I mean, it's right here on YouTube too, but you can also listen to it on Apple Podcasts, on all of them. Yeah. And I have a lot of my little blurbs and articles and basically a blog, and that is on Substack. I recommend the Substack app. I mean, you don't have to. Go to Substack.com and so search for Matt Stevens. No, I don't have some fancy schmancy moniker. It's just Matt Stevens. On YouTube, it's Matt Stevens MSA for My Sober Addiction. And the podcast is called My Sober Addiction. Anyway, loved ones, that's all I got. I love you, and I will be back directly.